Hi, my name is Jamie Nisbet, and I'm Assistant Director of Graduate Recruitment for Studio Arts College International, SACI, in Florence, Italy. And tonight's webinar, we are speaking with an alum from the Post-Baccalaureate Certificate in Studio Art program, John Verney. And so we're going to be just kind of having a conversation about John's work, about his experience at SACI, and then also answering your questions as you kind of explore graduate options at SACI. Any prospective student for any of our graduate programs is welcome to join and ask questions. John's from our post-bac program, but has spent a lot of time in Florence with our faculty and staff and can kind of talk about his experience there. Some kind of information, if you're joining us using a browser, you'll see next to the screen there's a live chat section. You can feel free to start entering your questions in there. There sometimes can be a bit of a delay, so feel free to start putting them in now, and we'll get to them through the course of the session. And if you're using a mobile device, you'll either want to use the YouTube app, because if you're using the app, you can pull up from the bottom, and then the chat screen to enter your questions will be there. So just keep that in mind, that you're free to start asking questions now, and we'll try to get to all of those before the end of the session. We'll go probably for about 40-45 minutes, depending on how many questions you have, and so I think we'll get started right away. So John, I'm going to take it to you to introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about your background.
Okay. Hey, everyone. I'm John Verney. As Jamie said, I was a post-bac student at SACI from 2010 to 2011. But before that, I got my BFA in painting from Mass College of Art in Boston. And when I was a junior, as an undergrad, I wound up actually studying abroad at SACI as an undergrad student, which was, one of these sort of remarkably formative experiences for me. And so I spent one semester at SACI, and it really stuck in my mind as like a place I would want to go back to. So ultimately, when I finished up my undergrad degree, I applied for the postbac program as a way of doing that experience that I had begun to have at SACI. And then what was really kind of nice is that experience of being a postbac can kind of like double down again, and I ended up getting hired as a TA for the photo media program at SACI. So I was there for another year, and it really helped. It really helped me prepare for going to grad school eventually, which I just graduated from last year from the University of Michigan, Stamp School of Art and Design. And yeah, now I'm out in the world, exhibiting work and applying for projects and going to residencies, and just trying to keep the momentum going. So.
Which is great. And anyone joining too, you can feel free to check out John's work on his website too. It's johnverney.com. It's really great. I know I got to see some of it, some of your recent work, both on your website, but I think in person when you're in your grad program too.
Right. Yeah.
But I especially want to go into some of the post-bac program itself. And so when you're thinking about kind of the work that you did during there, I know some of it really ended up correlating in development. You developed it even further in your grad program and in the work you were doing. So do you want to kind of talk about a little bit about your work and how you kind of got started during the post-bac program and where that kind of development led you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's easier for me to kind of walk backwards a little bit, but my current practice is really this. It's really material based, and it's kind of I kind of oscillate between a painting practice and this photography practice, and it's like largely become when things get really interesting is when I try to begin to synthesize these two mediums together. And what was really kind of nice is when I was going to grad school, where this really started to kind of come to fruition for me. I realized that like the seeds of this current work, the beginnings of this work that I was doing were like sown as my experience as a post-bac. And I think SACI was like a really perfect place for me to do that, because my background is in painting, as I mentioned, but I was always really excited about like other media and like other disciplines as being like extensions of painting, or like sculpting something that you paint, and then like painting the thing that you sculpted, and having that kind of feedback loop. And SACI was a small enough and accessible enough program where I could really kind of from thing to thing and do a lot of experimentation, a lot of hands-on, um, work, and getting to learn get into work of different disciplines like ceramics, really get intensively into darkroom photography, and it all the while kind of keeping my painting practice going. So yeah.
And did you want to talk maybe a little bit, because I know you worked with, especially because you worked across departments so much, I think for those that are joining might be interested in something like our MFA in photo program or the post-bac program or something like studio art. And I know you haven't worked with every single faculty member at SACI, but I know that you really, it is a small enough community where you do get to know everyone. But I also know that you worked closely with one of the co-directors for our MFA in photo program, Romeo Di Loretto, both in your own work and then also as a TA, but also talking about like the graduate seminars within the post-bac program. You don't have to cover everybody, but especially because I know some of the faculty members were really instrumental in kind of some of that experimentation that you were doing.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, you're right. SACI is a small enough community that it's really easy to form relationships with everyone there, and also everyone's like a fantastic person, and a really interesting person, and very generous with their time, and like really proud of what they do. So it does feel it's like a very serious and like nutritional environment, because everyone's like really passionate about what they're into and the thing that they're teaching. So that's really great. And yeah, I mean, and as Jamie said, I've worked with a few faculty members closer than others. One being Lorenzo Pezzettini, who was the director of the post-bac program. And if you do it, the post-bac program, primarily he's like kind of the point person for that. And so, I mean, it's like, I get this, it's important for me to be like, how to be objective, because Lorenzo's like my pseudo-Italian uncle, dad guy. He's an amazing person, incredibly electric personality, really dynamic, very thoughtful. He's an amazing artist. He's had a very long career that was based in New York, in Rome, Massachusetts, and now Florence. He's a native Florentine. He's like incredibly proud of where he's from, and he really goes. He pulls out all the stops to kind of really give his students a feel for what it is to be a Florentine. He has a really great admiration for history, as well as historical art, as well as contemporary Italian art. So I think it's a really incredible. It was really incredible for me and a real luxury to be able to study with this man that was so keen on transmitting all this like wonderful cultural knowledge that he has. And he obviously is like, he just really loves doing that and sharing that. And that was really great. And then the other professor I worked really close with was Romeo Di Loretto, that Jamie mentioned, and he's the is he the director of the photo program now?
Yeah, he's the department head for all of photography, both undergraduate and graduate, but he's a co-director for the MFA in photography program.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So he was a director then too for me. I just don't know what. But yeah, so I worked with him as a student, and then I also ended up being his TA. And yeah, Romeo's kind of like my photo guru. He's like a remarkably poetic, sensitive, romantic guy. Amazing photographer. He's had an incredible life story and training. He used to work at Kodak as like a head lab technician for like the Kodachrome lab or something epic like that. He's a master black and white printer. He used to be the printer for the Alinari archive, and he's like done printed shows for like Gerhard Richter and like Francesca Woodman and all these just like giants. So he like knows the art and craft of like fine art, black and white, analog printing through and through, like to a science. Like literally, I think he has a degree in chemistry. And working with him actually as his TA, one of the duties I had was I would make the chemistry for the school for all the dark rooms. So, I'd put on my mask and get the big bags of, raw crystals and, just Jamie, you know what I'm talking about.
I was also, I should tell the audience, I was also a TA for so I've been there as well. So I've studied with them too.
Well, yeah, anyway, so it was in that, in the performance of those duties of like making that chemistry and actually getting really kind of interested in like the kind of like material index of like the materiality of photography, which is usually something that I usually think, I used to think of as like sort of like a virtual or kind of a flat, thing is actually really based in a material chemical, foundation. And Romeo encouraged me to follow that, and he ended up making the suggestion of experimenting with sepia toning a gelatin silver print in a hot spring, which I did, and it worked, and then that ended up actually becoming the core of my MFA thesis work like 4 years later. So
and
like, totally for that.
The hot spring that did you go to Abruzzo? Were you?
No, I actually I had this kind of like wild. I hitchhiked down to this hot spring, like in Siena, south of Siena.
I didn't know if you went. I couldn't remember if you went to Abruzzo, which is where Romeo is from, and then also he's spent a lot of time with our MFA and photo students there too. So
yeah. No, actually, I've never been to Abruzzo. It's like one of those outstanding places in Regent.
Yeah, I haven't either. So I just was curious if this was one of the things that you did with him. But yeah, I think that to me is kind of a cool thing. I think maybe all people as artists, you don't always realize kind of where something started, and then you look back and you're like, oh, this like thing that I just like haven't been able to like. I've been developing in my practice and continuing with came from this moment of my life, so so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's I always find that as like a kind of a nice affirmation that like nothing is, it's like everything that you're doing, it's not random, like you're like continually like honing after something that you get like increasingly closer to, or you get like you start to connect pieces, and that like the things that you're doing that might have at the time seemed like you're just flailing around is actually like, oh, I was like consistently after a very consistent idea or notion or thing, and you just get better at articulating that one thing or something, or that getting to describe that territory that you're interested in. So
yeah. And, to kind of change directions a little bit, but not really entirely, I think for a lot of students, and I think of this, of course, everyone thinks of Florence as being the birthplace of the Renaissance, which is really an awesome truth about the city and all the art that you get to see. So, but also I think one of the kind of excellent things about studying there too is that there is still a great connection to contemporary art, and both travel that you do within the city of Florence and then in Italy, but also just having kind of Europe at your fingertips. Can you kind of speak to that? Both, just kind of what your experience is really.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the weight of history, I mean, it's just so, there's such a magnificent wealth of history and cultural heritage that Florence has, that I think when people think of Florence, that tends to be the thing that dominates their perception. But it's still like a major European city. It gets millions of visitors, and as such, there's like a lot of really kind of excellent contemporary art that comes through as well. So, I mean, like shows by really big people like Ai Weiwei and Bill Viola, I think, just to name a few, I think had major shows in some of the museums that are in the city center. And there's also the Italian Academia is there. And there's a lot of like a lot to this day. The like Art Academy and the sort of the art schools that Italian like youth and young people are attending, they're all still based in the city center, so it's pretty vivacious actually. And I think like someone like Lorenzo is really just an incredible asset because he's really tapped into like what's happening. He's a practicing artist, and actually everyone at SACI is a practicing artist. So they're all clued into the scene that they're in, or like the scene in Florence. So what's great is like when you're with Lorenzo, he like really tells you about what's going on, and like that's really helpful, especially when you're in a city you've never been before. Kind of say, oh, there's a cool gallery around the corner, or there's, this is happening tonight, or this guy's doing something interesting, or whatever. So, yeah, there's, again, like the Jewel of the Renaissance is like, does tend to like steal a lot of the headlines, but like a lot going on there. Yeah.
Well, I kind of think of it too in terms of like sizes of cities. Florence is kind of a medium-sized city, and maybe, as a comparison to maybe a major U.S. city of the same size, you might get some really interesting artists and artwork there, but not some of the really kind of big names that Florence still gets, like you mentioned, Ai Weiwei. But really, because Florence is so iconic, you have that kind of as something to draw, kind of
right.
and some interesting lectures, and just the conversation too around art making. I think also people are just unendingly curious about the Renaissance too. So I just think that it just draws visitors. So then it also draws artists and contemporary art, and I also think maybe the proximity to major events like the Venice Biennale as well. Pretty significant.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely. Yeah, and as a student, you like, it was great that like you're there studying, and then they're like, hey, we're getting, we're going to be going to see the Biennale together as like a field trip. It's like, that's crazy. Yeah. So you just get to like scoot up to get on the train and go up to see the Biennale for a weekend and come back and like talk about it as a seminar. And I'm like, that's amazing. So
yeah. And then to kind of go into also just like living in Florence too.
Yeah.
I guess I don't have any questions about it too much, but to kind of give some background to any prospective students that are watching too, is that at SACI we do offer housing to students, and they live in apartments that are all right in the historic center. A standard room in an apartment is a double room, and you can request a single and pay a single supplement for it, like typical university housing. And the apartments tend to be 2 to 3 bedrooms. They have things like kitchens and washers and pots and pans and dishes, which is a great option. I think for graduate students, I tend to leave it pretty open. Some students will choose to do independent housing, others will use SACI housing. I've done both, and I assume you have too, John. And so I guess, do you have any, advice about, I know we usually have a list of like rental agencies students can use if they're looking for independent housing, but do you have any kind of, advice about not housing, but just maybe even life in Florence and kind of your experience being kind of a resident in the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of gauge like the kind of experience you want to have. I think I know that my experience, I wanted to do the SACI housing when I first got there, so that wasn't something that I had to try to like get on the ground floor and like in addition to everything else try to figure that out.
Yeah.
But eventually later on, like when I'd made Italian friends and ended up moving with them, and I kind of got my legs at that point. What was it? Oh, being a resident. I mean, I think that's like an incredible. It's something that I really miss, and I think has been incredibly informative and instructive as to who I am now, worldview wise, how I relate to people in different cultures. Because the opportunity to be like a resident in a culture that is not your own, I think is like just so invaluable, because you learn just as much about the place that you've come from as the place you are now, and it really, I mean, it's like a part of who I am now. I didn't have that experience. And it's also great is that there's this sort of sense of like when you visit another place, there's a sort of kind of like fatigue that starts to set in, because like you're kind of always like, okay, I got to see this, this, and this I'm hungry. You're like, or like, it just feels like you're kind of like trying to like sustain like something that isn't actually that sustainable very long because you're only there for like a limited amount of time. When you're a resident, something else kind of kicks in where you like all those tiny little rhythms that you have in your own daily practice and commute. Like you kind of build these like relationships that end up they're minute, but they end up taking on a kind of profound level. Like the cafe, the bar that you go to get your coffee in the morning on your way to the studio. You form a relationship with that person and I think by and large, Italians and Florentines especially are a very generous, accommodating people. Like they're genuinely interested in, foreigners coming to. They're very proud of their culture, and they're very sort of inviting for like foreigners, especially if you come back every day to a place, they like love that, and then something really beautiful starts to happen where they.
That was definitely my experience as well, is that you kind of start to make your habits and it is different that, there are visitors that come to Florence from all over the world just for a few days and kind of come and go. But when you're there for an extended period of time, people they start to recognize you and you kind of connect with the community in a bigger way. And I don't know if this is true for you, but for me, it really did feed into also the work that I was making and how I was looking at. I mean, I'm a photographer primarily, so and really interested in street photography. But even then, it was kind of having that extended time where it's not just come for a few days as photographer and see some sites and like maybe see like something shallow.
That's a great point.
That kind of time, but then you get to see things a little bit deeper, or I don't know, feel the success of like making a joke in another language that people get, or something, that kind of thing.
That's like the most like glorious. Hold that off. And I mean, also, like you said, like just the act of being able to like see, like give yourself a chance to slow down and actually like really see and take in what you're seeing, as opposed to like rushing around and like, having kind of like, as you said, what is by and large probably a more superficial take. To really take the time to almost kind of meditate on the place you're at, I think is really an amazing way to experience a place. So.
Yeah, great. And I'm hoping that we can get some questions going here. I don't see any yet, but I might need to just refresh my screen too. I know we do have some viewers, so if you're viewing live, I definitely would encourage you to start asking questions if you have them, because we'll end it if we don't have a ton of questions. But it has been really nice to talk to you, John, though. I think it's been
nice to talk to you.
Really good too. And I know we do have some viewers on the audience, and for those of you that are maybe watching this later, because I know some people won't have joined live too, that you can like I said, check out John's work on his website, but also you can look back into the archives of this kind of part of our YouTube channel and see some other alumni conversations from different programs too. Although, like I said, I think John has a lot of great background while he was in the post-bac program with a lot of our faculty too. And I think also photography students could really might have kind of a similar experience to you, since you were both a TA and also worked during the post-bac with our photo department.
Okay.
But I'm not seeing any questions. I'm trying to think of anything I might have missed, because we talked about kind of studio development and practice. I guess, you did talk a little bit about jumping around and taking some courses. I know the structure of the post-bac program, if we're going to get into the curriculum, is the graduate seminars that are kind of during both semesters of the post-bac program. But then you're also able to take other courses, and you mentioned ceramics and photography. How did those things kind of feed into your work in the graduate seminars? And what did you take though? Like, what was kind of the progression or kind of thought behind some of the courses that you were taking?
Well, from what I remember, I think Oh, that's like kind of going back and
Yeah, I know it's been a few years, like more
yeah,
than.
yeah. No, it's been well. I think what you do, you kind of declare as a postbac, you kind of declare a concentration, and I don't know if you have to do that from the beginning or you declare it like after a semester or so. And so don't quote me on that, but like you do. So mine was painting, but you know I was also in this, and I think most everyone in my cohort, and I'd imagine is a pretty common trend amongst postbac groups is you know it's a great chance to experiment, and you know so I knew that I wanted to work in the darkroom, and I almost probably did too much, but it was just like just got excited. So ceramics, there's art history classes which are really extraordinary to take because you know you meet on site. Like we're gonna meet by the David tomorrow, so you know, that's like kind of an amazing uh, situation again. And there's also Italian classes that are offered, which are great. The Italian teachers there are beautiful, lovely people. And I really recommend that if someone goes and has time to or feels like they have time and an interest in learning that, because I think it's a like Jamie said, that's an amazing thing. Once you start like being able to have like little interactions with people, it's like something really like kind of beautiful happens to your psyche where you start to feel like you're like really engaged, even though you just all you did was order a coffee. Um, but um, yeah, it's been a while, but I know at the end of the postbac program, you actually have a show, an exhibition. And when I was there, it was at this like great little contemporary art gallery called La Corte, and I was it was like I think literally like a court, right? It was like an old courtyard or something that had like
We still use the Corte, and then we also work with a couple of other spaces too for
yeah,
kind of end of the year exhibitions for all the grad programs. But yeah, like I think
yeah.
the other spaces is La Marate or
Oh,
something.
La Marata, yeah, yeah. So yeah, like
Yeah.
really amazing old spaces that have like a really interesting architectural past and like all different kind of like stratum of different periods of time that are all kind of embedded. Like everything you think about like old Italian architecture, and like the chance to exhibit in a space like that is really kind of incredible. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the culmination of the program, which is like you're kind of consistently working towards that.
Yeah, which I think is good. And I think probably for a lot of students, it's a really great opportunity because, I mean, you're doing a lot of experimentation, but the idea is that you're also creating a body of work that would be in the exhibition, and then also would be something that could be a catalyst for the postbac in particular to apply to further graduate studies or to apply to residencies or show your work, that kind of thing too.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Which I know is definitely the path that you took. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, and I can say with the University of Michigan where I went, it was a really great it was a great fit for me because it's an interdisciplinary program. So there's no set major that you know you declare you have an MFA in studio art. It was a small program, very much like you know SACI, about 7 people in my cohort, and there is this a really big international component of the program, and so that means like you know emphasis on international travel and interdisciplinary like kind of cross cultural exchange, and um, so having gone to SACI and having had this time in Italy, I know now after speaking to the people that were the people that I interviewed or interviewed me for when I was applying, they were really excited about this. They thought I was an interesting candidate. In addition to my work and you know statement and things that I had this sort of unique experience under my belt
Yeah.
that set me apart from you know the other school of applicants, because they were like, oh, that's cool. Like this person spent all this time in another country, and you know he's going to bring this different sensibility to the program. So yeah, I think applying to grad school is like your life story and your experiences are like, I know every program is a little different, but they are looking for interesting candidates in a way, you know, people that have like lived an interesting life and have done unique things. So yeah, I think spending a year in Florence, I think is like, that counts as interesting, I think,
I think
you know?
yeah.
I'd be interested in that. So.
But I think that's a good kind of note to end on too. So we didn't get any questions. I know I see viewers out there, so this is kind of the end of the opportunity. But I hope that this conversation was helpful for everybody that joined and that also watches later. If you do have any questions, I think most of the viewers that joined through my live link have our email address and can contact us, but you can also find our contact information on our main website, saci-florence.edu. And I do want to thank you, John, for taking the time to talk about the program, and everyone can check out and see the work he's been doing. John's been exhibiting all over, so very proud SACI family, you know, congratulations on some these great shows you've been having. And yeah, so thanks for joining. So I'm going to stop the broadcast here. So like I said, any of the live viewers, feel free to contact the SACI admissions office if you have any questions. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thanks, y'all.